Wajenberg. This time we're going to continue our reading of The Day Boy and the Night Girl by George MacDonald, a fairy tale about a boy and a girl who, as an experiment, were raised by a witch, one to never see the night and the other to never see the day. But the night girl, who has been raised in a dungeon, has recently been getting out and has discovered the moon. When next she succeeded in getting out, a half-moon hung in the east. A new lamp had come, she thought, and all would be well. It would be endless to describe the phases of feeling through which Nycteris passed, more numerous and delicate than those of 1,000 changing moons. A fresh bliss bloomed in her soul with every varying aspect of infinite nature. Ere long she began to suspect that the new moon was the old moon, gone out and come in again like herself. Also that, unlike herself, it wasted and grew again, that it was indeed a live thing, subject like herself to caverns and keepers and solitudes, escaping and shining when it could. Was it a prison like hers it was shut in? And did it grow dark when the lamp left it? Where could be the way into it? With that first she began to look below as well as above and around her, and then first noted the tops of the trees between her and the floor. There were palms with their red-fingered hands full of fruit, eucalyptus trees crowded with little boxes of powder puffs, oleanders with their half-cast roses, and orange trees with their clouds of young silver stars and their aged balls of gold. Her eyes could see colors invisible to ours in the moonlight, and all these she could distinguish well, though at first she took them for the shapes and colors of the carpet of the great room. She longed to get down among them, now that she saw they were real creatures, but she did not know how. She went along the whole length of the wall to the end that crossed the river, but found no way of going down. Above the river she stopped to gaze with awe upon the rushing water. She knew nothing of water but from what she drank and what she bathed in, and as the moon shone on the dark, swift streams, singing lustily as it flowed, she did not doubt the river was alive, a swift rushing serpent of life, going out? Whither? And then she wondered if what was brought into her rooms had been killed, that she might drink it and have her bath in it. Once, when she stepped out upon the wall, it was into the midst of a fierce wind. The trees were all roaring. Great clouds were rushing along the skies and tumbling over the little lamps. The great lamp had not yet come. All was in tumult. The wind seized her garments and hair and shook them as if it would tear them from her. What could she have done to make the gentle creature so angry? Or was this another creature altogether, of the same kind, but hugely bigger and of a very different temper and behavior? But the whole place was angry. Or was it that the creatures dwelling in it, the wind and the trees and the clouds and the river, had all quarreled each with all the rest? Would the whole come to confusion and disorder? But as she gazed, wondering and disquieted, the moon, larger than ever she had seen her, came lifting herself above the horizon to look, broad and red, as if she too were swollen with anger that she had been roused from her rest by their noise and compelled to hurry up to see what her children were about, thus rioting in her absence, lest they should rack the whole frame of things. And as she rose, the loud wind grew quieter and scolded less fiercely, the trees grew stiller and moaned with a lower complaint, and the clouds hunted and hurled themselves less wildly across the sky. As if she were pleased that her children obeyed her very presence, the moon grew smaller as she ascended the heavenly stair, her puffed cheeks sank, her complexion grew clearer, and a sweet smile spread over her countenance as peacefully she rose and rose. But there was treason and rebellion in her court, for ere she reached the top of her great stairs, the clouds had assembled, forgetting their late wars, and very still they were as they laid their heads together and conspired. Then, combining and lying silently in wait until she came near, they threw themselves upon her and swallowed her up. Down from the roof came spots of wet, faster and faster, and they wetted the cheeks of Nycteris, and what could they be but the tears of the moon, crying because her children were smothering her? Nycteris wept too, and not knowing what to think, stole back in dismay to her room. The next time she came out in fear and trembling. There was the moon still, away in the west, poor indeed and old, and looking dreadfully worn, as if all the wild beasts in the sky had been gnawing at her, but there she was, alive still, and able to shine. 11. The sunset. Knowing nothing of darkness or stars or moon, Photogen spent his days in hunting. On a great white horse he swept over the grassy plains, glorying in the sun, fighting the wind and killing the buffaloes. One morning, when he happened to be on the ground a little earlier than usual and before his attendants, he caught sight of an animal unknown to him, stealing from a hollow into which the sun rays had not yet reached. Like a swift shadow it sped over the grass, slinking southward to the forest. He gave chase, noted the body of a buffalo it had half eaten, and pursued it the harder. But with great leaps and bounds the creature shot farther and farther ahead of him and vanished. Therefore, turning defeated, he met Fargu, who had been following him as far as his horse would carry him. "What animal was that, Fargu?" he asked. "How did he run? How he did run!" Fargu answered he might be a leopard, but he rather thought from his pace and look he was a young lion. "What a coward he must be," said Photogen. "Don't be too sure of that," rejoined Fargu. "He is one of the creatures the sun makes uncomfortable. As soon as the sun is down he will be brave enough." He'd scarcely said it when he repented, nor did he regret it the less when he found that Photogen made no reply. But alas, said was said. "Then," said Photogen to himself, "that contemptible beast is one of the terrors of sundown of which Madame Watho spoke." He hunted all day, but not with his usual spirit. He did not ride so hard, and did not kill one buffalo. Fargu, to his dismay, observed also that he took every pretext for moving farther and farther south, nearer to the forest. But all at once, the sun now sinking in the west, he seemed to change his mind, for he turned his horse's head and rode home so fast that the rest could not keep him in sight. When they arrived, they found his horse in the stable, and concluded that he had gone into the castle. But he had in truth set out again by the back of it. Crossing the river a good way up the valley, he reascended to the ground they had left, and just before sunset reached the skirts of the forest. The level orb shone straight in between the bare stems, and saying to himself he could not fail to find the beast, he rushed into the wood. But even as he entered, he turned and looked to the west. The rim of the red was just touching the horizon, all jagged with broken hills. "Now," said Photogen, "we shall see." But he said it in the face of a darkness he had not proved. The moment the sun began to sink among the spikes and saw edges, with a kind of sudden flap at his heart, a fear inexplicable laid hold of the youth, and as he had never felt anything of the kind before, the very fear itself terrified him. As the sun sank, it rose like the shadow of the world, and grew deeper and darker. He could not even think what it might be, so utterly did it enfeeble him. When the last flaming scimitar edge of the sun went out like a lamp, his horror seemed to blossom into very madness. Like the closing lids of an eye, for there was no twilight and this night no moon, the terror and the darkness rushed together, and he knew them for one. He was no longer the man he had known, or rather thought himself. The courage he had had was in no sense his own. He had only had courage, not been courageous. It had left him, and he could scarcely stand, certainly not stand straight, for not one of his joints could he make stiff or keep from trembling. He was but a spark of the sun, in himself nothing. The beast was behind him, stealing upon him. He turned. All was dark in the wood, but to his fancy the darkness here and there broke into pairs of green eyes, and he had not the power even to raise his bow hand from his side. In the strength of despair he strove to rouse courage enough, not to fight, that he did not even desire, but to run. Courage to flee home was all he could ever imagine, and it would not come. But what he had not was ignominiously given him. A cry in the wood, half a screech, half a growl, sent him running like a boar-wounded cur. It was not even himself that ran, it was the fear that had come alive in his legs. He did not know that they moved. But as he ran, he grew able to run, gained courage at least to be a coward. The stars gave a little light. Over the grass he sped, and nothing followed him. How fallen, how changed from the youth who had climbed the hill as the sun went down. A mere contempt to himself. The self that contemned was a coward with the self it condemned. There lay the shapeless black of a buffalo humped upon the grass. He made a wide circuit and swept on like a shadow driven in the wind. For the wind had risen and added to his terror. It blew from behind him. He reached the brow of the valley and shot down the steep descent like a falling star. Instantly the whole upper country behind him arose and pursued him. The wind came howling after him, filled with screams, shrieks, yells, roars, laughter, and chatterings, as if all the animals of the forest were careering with it. In his ears was a trampling rush, the thunder of the hoofs of the cattle in career from every quarter of the wide plains to the brow of the hill above him. He fled straight for the castle, scarcely with breath enough to pant. As he reached the bottom of the valley, the moon peered up over its edge. He had never seen the moon before, except in the daytime when he had taken her for a thin, bright cloud. She was a fresh terror to him, so ghostly, so ghastly, so gruesome, so knowing as she looked over the top of her garden wall upon the world outside. That was the night itself, the darkness alive, and after him, the horror of horrors coming down the sky to curdle his blood and turn his brain to a cinder. He gave a sob and made straight for the river, where it ran between the two walls at the bottom of the garden. He plunged in, struggled through, clambered up the bank, and fell senseless on the grass. 12. The Garden. Although Nycteris took care not to stay out long at a time, and used every precaution, she could hardly have escaped discovery so long had it not been that the strange attacks to which Watho was subject had been more frequent of late, and had at last settled into an illness which kept her to her bed. But whether from an access of caution or from suspicion, Falca, having now to be much with her mistress both day and night, took it at length into her head to fasten the door as often as she went out by her usual place of exit, so that one night, when Nycteris pushed, she found to her dismay and surprise that the wall pushed her again, and would not let her through. Nor, with all her searching, could she discover wherein lay the cause of the change. Then first she felt the pressure of her prison walls, and turning, half in despair, groped her way to the picture where she had once seen Falca disappear. There she soon found the spot by pressing upon which the wall yielded. It let her through into a sort of cellar, where there was a glimmer of light from a sky whose blue was paled by the moon. From the cellar she got into a long passage into which the moon was shining, and came to a door. She managed to open it, and to her great joy found herself in the other place, not on top of the wall, however, but in the garden she had longed to enter. Noiseless as a fluffy moth, she flitted away into the covert of the trees and shrubs, her bare feet welcomed by the softest of carpets, which, by the very touch, her feet knew to be alive, whence it came that it was so sweet and friendly to them. A soft little wind was out among the trees, running now here, now there, like a child that had got its will. She went dancing over the grass, looking behind her at her shadow as she went. At first she had taken it for a little black creature that made game of her, but when she perceived that it was only where she kept the moon away, and that every tree, however great and grand a creature, had also one of these strange attendants, she soon learned not to mind it. And by it became the source of as much amusement to her as to any kitten its tail. It was long before she was quite at home with the trees, however. At one time they seemed to disapprove of her, at another not even to know she was there, and to be altogether taken up with their own business. Suddenly, as she went from one to another of them, looking up with awe at the murmuring mystery of their branches and leaves, she spied one a little way off, which was very different from all the rest. It was white and dark and sparkling, and spread like a palm, a small slender palm without much head, and it grew very fast, and sang as it grew. But it never grew any bigger, for just as fast as she could see it growing, it kept falling to pieces. When she got close to it, she discovered that it was a water tree, made of just such water as she washed with, only it was alive, of course, like the river, a different sort of water from that, doubtless, seeing the one crept swiftly along the floor, and the other shot straight up, and fell and swallowed itself, and rose again. She put her feet into the marble basin, which was the flower pot in which it grew. It was full of real water, living and cool, so nice, for the night was hot. But the flowers, the flowers! She was friends with them from the very first. What wonderful creatures they were! And so kind and beautiful, always sending out such colors and scents, red scent and white scent and yellow scent, for the other creatures. The one that was invisible and everywhere took such a quantity of their scents and carried it away, yet they did not seem to mind. It was their talk to show they were alive, and not painted like those on the walls of her rooms or on the carpets. She wandered along down the garden until she reached the river. Unable then to get any further, for she was a little afraid, and justly, of the swift watery serpent, she dropped on the grassy bank, dipped her feet in the water, and felt it running and pushing against them. For a long time she sat thus, and her bliss seemed complete as she gazed at the river and watched the broken picture of the great lamp overhead moving up one side of the roof to go down the other. 13. Something quite new. A beautiful moth brushed across the great blue eyes of Nycteris. She sprang to her feet to follow it, not in the spirit of the hunter, but of the lover. Her heart, like every heart, if only its fallen sides were cleared away, was an inexhaustible fountain of love. She loved everything she saw. But as she followed the moth, she caught sight of something lying on the bank of the river, and not yet having learned to be afraid of anything, ran straight to see what it was. Reaching it, she stood amazed. Another girl like herself! But what a strange-looking girl! So curiously dressed, too, and not able to move. Was she dead? Filled with sudden pity, she sat down, lifted Photogen's head, laid it on her lap, and began stroking his face. Her warm hands brought him to himself. He opened his black eyes, out of which had gone all the fire, and looked up with a strange sound of fear, half moan, half gasp. But when he saw her face, he drew a deep breath and lay motionless, gazing at her. Those blue marvels above him, like a better sky, seemed to side with courage and assuage his terror. At length, in a trembling, awed voice and a half-whisper, he said, "Who are you?" "I am Nycteris," she answered. "You are a creature of the darkness and love the night," he said, his fear beginning to move again. "I may be a creature of the darkness," she replied. "I hardly know what you mean, but I do not love the night. I love the day with all my heart, and I sleep all the night long." "How can that be?" said Photogen, rising on his elbow, but dropping his head on her lap again the moment he saw the moon. "How can it be," he repeated, "when I see your eyes there wide awake?" She only smiled and stroked him, for she did not understand him, and thought he did not know what he was saying. "Was it a dream, then?" resumed Photogen, rubbing his eyes. But with that his memory came clear, and he shuddered and cried, "Oh, horrible, horrible, to be turned all at once into a coward, a shameful, contemptible, disgraceful coward! I am ashamed, ashamed, and so frightened! It is all so frightful!" "What is so frightful?" asked Nycteris, with a smile like that of a mother to her child waked from a bad dream. All, he answered, "all this darkness and roaring." "My dear," said Nycteris, "there's no roaring. How sensitive you must be! What you hear is only the walking of the water, and the running about of the sweetest of all the creatures. She is invisible, and I call her everywhere, for she goes through all the other creatures and comforts them. Now she's amusing herself, and them too, with shaking them and kissing them and blowing in their faces. Listen, do you call that roaring? You should hear her when she is rather angry, though. I don't know why, but she is sometimes, and then she does roar a little." "It's so horribly dark," said Photogen, who, listening while she spoke, had satisfied himself there was no roaring. "Dark?" she echoed. "You should be in my room when an earthquake has killed my lamp. I do not understand. How can you call this dark? Let me see. Yes, you have eyes, and big ones, bigger than Madame Watho's or Falca's, but not so big as mine, I fancy, only I never saw mine. But then, oh yes, I know what the matter is. You can't see with them because they're so black. Darkness can't see, of course. Never mind, I will be your eyes and teach you to see. Look here, at these lovely white things in the grass, with red sharp points all folded together into one. Oh, I love them so. I could sit looking at them all day." Photogen looked close at the flowers, and thought he had seen something like them before, but could not make them out. As Nycteris had never seen an open daisy, so he had never seen a closed one. Thus instinctively Nycteris tried to turn him away from his fear, and the beautiful creature's strange, lovely talk helped not a little to make him forget it. "You call it dark," she said again, as if she could not get rid of the absurdity of the idea. "Why, I could count every blade of the green hair, I suppose it is what the books call grass, within 2 yards of me, And just look at the great lamp. It is brighter than usual today, and I can't think why you should be frightened or call it dark." As she spoke, she went on stroking his cheeks and hair and trying to comfort him. But oh, how miserable he was, and how plainly he looked it. He was on the point of saying that her great lamp was dreadful to him, looking like a witch, walking in the sleep of death, but he was not so ignorant as Nycteris, and knew even in the moonlight that she was a woman, though he had never seen one so young or so lovely before, and while she comforted his fear, her presence made him the more ashamed of it. Besides, not knowing her nature, he might annoy her and make her leave him to his misery. He lay still, therefore, hardly daring to move. All the little life he had seemed to come from her, as if he were to move, she might move, and if she were to leave him, he must weep like a child. "How did you come here?" asked Nycteris, taking his face between her hands. "Down the hill," he answered. "Where do you sleep?" he asked. He signed in the "Where do you sleep?" she asked. He signed in the direction of the house. She gave a little laugh of delight. "When you have learned not to be frightened, you will always be wanting to come with me," she said. She thought with herself she would ask her presently, when she had come to herself a little, how she had made her escape, for she must, of course, like herself, have got out of a cave in which Watho and Falca had been keeping her. "Look at the lovely colors," she went on, pointing to a rose bush on which Photogen could not see a single flower. "They're far more beautiful, are they not, than any of the colors upon your walls? And then they are alive and smell so sweet." He wished she would not make him keep opening his eyes to look at things he could not see, and every other moment would start and grasp tight hold of her as some fresh pang of terror shot into him. "Come, come, dear," said Nycteris. "You must not go on this way. You must be a brave girl, and—" "A girl!" shouted Photogen, and started to his feet in wrath. "If you were a man, I should kill you." "A man?" repeated Nycteris. "What is that? How could I be that? We're both girls, are we not?" "No, I'm not a girl," he answered. "Although," he added, changing his tone and casting himself on the ground at her feet, "I've given you too good reason to call me one." "Oh, I see," returned Nycteris. "No, of course you can't be a girl. Girls are not afraid without reason. I understand now. It is because you are not a girl that you are so frightened." Photogen twisted and writhed upon the grass. "No, it is not," he said sulkily. "It is this horrible darkness that creeps into me, goes all through me, into the very marrow of my bones. That is what makes me behave like a girl. If only the sun would rise." "The sun? What is it?" cried Nycteris, now in her turn conceiving a vague fear. Then Photogen broke into a rhapsody, in which he vainly sought to forget his. "It is the soul, the life, the heart, the glory of the universe," he said. "The worlds dance like motes in his beam. The heart of man is strong and brave in his light, and when it departs his courage grows from him, goes with the sun, and he becomes such as you see me now." "Then that is not the sun?" said Nycteris thoughtfully, pointing up at the moon. "That!" cried Photogen with utter scorn. "I know nothing about that, except it is ugly and horrible. At best it can be only the ghost of a dead sun. Yes, that is it. That is what makes it look so frightful." "No," said Nycteris, after a long, thoughtful pause. "You must be wrong there. I think the sun is the ghost of a dead moon, and that is how he is so much more splendid, as you say. Is there, then, another big room where the sun lives in the roof?" "I do not know what you mean," replied Photogen. "But you mean to be kind, I know, though you should not call a poor fellow in the dark a girl. If you will let me lie here with my head in your lap, I should like to sleep. Will you watch me and take care of me?" "Yes, I will," answered Nycteris, forgetting all her own danger. So Photogen fell asleep. 14. The Sun. There Nycteris sat, and there the youth lay all night long, in the heart of the great cone shadow of the earth, like two pharaohs in one pyramid. Photogen slept and slept, and Nycteris sat motionless lest she should wake him, and so betray him to his fear. The moon rode high in the blue eternity. It was a very triumph of glorious night. The river ran babble-murmuring in deep soft syllables. The fountain kept rushing moonward and blossoming momently to a great silver flower, whose petals were forever falling like snow, but with a continual musical clash, into the bed of its exhaustion beneath. The wind woke, took a run among the trees, went to sleep, and woke again. The daisies slept on their feet at hers, but she did not know they slept. The roses might well seem awake, for their scent filled the air, but in truth they slept also, and the odor was that of their dreams. The oranges hung like gold lamps in the trees, and their silvery flowers were the souls of their yet unembodied children. The scent of the acacia blooms filled the air like the very odor of the moon herself. At last, unused to the living air and weary with sitting so still and long, Nycteris grew drowsy. The air began to grow cool. It was getting near the time when she too was accustomed to sleep. She closed her eyes for just a moment and nodded, opened them suddenly wide, for she had promised to watch. In that moment a change had come. The moon had got round and was fronting her from the west, and she saw that her face was altered, that she had grown pale, as if she too were wan with fear, and from her lofty place espied a coming terror. The light seemed to be dissolving out of her. She was dying. She was going out. And yet everything around looked strangely clear, clearer than ever she had seen anything before. How could the lamp be shedding more light when she herself had less? Ah, that was just it. See how faint she looked. It was because the light was forsaking her and spreading itself over the room that she grew so thin and pale. She was giving up everything. She was melting away from the roof like a bit of sugar in water. Nycteris was fast growing afraid, and sought refuge with the face upon her lap. How beautiful the creature was! What to call it she could not think, for it had been angry when she had called it what Watho called her. And wonder upon wonders, now even in the cold change that was passing upon the great room, the color as of a red rose was arising in the wan cheek. What beautiful yellow hair it was that spread over her lap! What great huge breaths the creature took! And what were those curious things it carried? She had seen them on her walls, she was sure. Thus she talked to herself while the lamp grew paler, and everything kept growing yet clearer. What could it mean? The lamp was dying, going out into the other place of which the creature in her lap had spoken, to be a sun. But why were the things growing clearer before it was yet a sun? That was the point. Was it her growing into a sun that did it? Yes, it was coming death. She knew it, for it was coming upon her also. She felt it coming. What she was about to grow into. Something beautiful like the creature in her lap? It might be. Anyhow, it must be death, for all her strength was going out of her, while all around her was growing so light she could not bear it. She must be blind soon. Would she be blind or dead first? For the sun was rushing up behind her. And if Photogen was afraid of the night, we will see how Nycteris copes with the day next time.